Now then, we know all about objects. So how about we store the data from that form in an object? I'll name it Flick, and I'll make it look like this. We'll have two properties, name and Chris. And I'm going to leave the trailing comma there because that's how I roll. So it seems that once I've done that, then what would be really cool is if I could say, okay, so for each property of this object, create a new span and add it to the list. See what I'm trying to do here? I'm trying to avoid writing the same thing over and over. I'm doing the same thing twice. But someday we could have all kinds of crazy properties here. We could have year of release. We could have star rating, Rotten Tomatoes rating, all that stuff. And I don't want to have to keep calling render property over and over and over. I just want it to already automatically happen. It should know what to do that as long as I've got this Flick object with all of those properties in it. So that's my objective here. I want to make a separate method that's just going to build the entire LI. Think that's achievable? Gosh darn right it's achievable. So I'm going to call it renderItem, and its job is going to be to build that entire LI. Const renderItem. And by golly, the only thing it needs to know from the outside is the Flick. So we're going to need to create an LI. We're going to do some stuff. Then we're going to return that item. Otherwise, I'll forget my return statement if I don't put it there right away. And then I'll be really frustrated when it doesn't work. So what is the something that I want it to do? Well, so we were adding the class Flick. I'll go ahead and just copy that. Then I need to loop over each thing in the Flick object and create a span called render property for each one of those. Then, with those results, I need to append each of those as a child to my item, right? That sounds like a lot. So let's break it down one by one. I need to loop over each property of the Flick. To bake an apple pie from scratch, you must first. That's right. So to loop over the list of properties from that object, we must first get the list of properties from that object. How do we get the list of properties in that object? How do I do it? I don't. Have I bothered you, Rebecca? I think I've left you all alone. Oh, except for when you made eye contact earlier, I almost called on you. No more hiding. What do you think? How do I get the list of keys out of an object? I don't know what properties there are. That's what I want to know. There could be 20 properties here, and I want this function to be able to handle it. How do I get the list of properties? Thank you, Saj. I've left you alone, too. That's not fair. Thank you. Thank you for correcting my oversight. Object.keys, flicks, right? Get the list of properties, and I'll go ahead and save it to a variable, just to make this all very clear. Object.keys, flicks. So once I have the list of keys, I can loop over it. How do I loop over it? And don't you dare say use a for loop. For loops are for weasels. I didn't know what they were for, just not for us. And we are not weasels, are we? Hey, wait. No, I did pester you. I asked you for spaghetti or something. No, you had noodles for lunch. That's what it was. All right, I think I've officially pestered everybody at least once. No. What? Well, that's because you've participated. I know. If you're asking questions of me, then that counts. Right? You're participating. Go for it, Kindle. Yeah, for each. Right. Come on, how many of you actually knew that? You just volunteer. It'll go faster. All right, so loop over each property. So properties dot for each. We pass in a function. So the function will receive as its argument each item in the array, each of which will be the name of a property, right? So I could name the variable property name, something like that, or key, or whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay, right there where it says count properties equals object.keys, is that because I know that object is its own object and then keys is a method from the object.
So object is the very concept of an object.
Yeah. So
it's the prototype for an object.
If you're setting constant properties equal to that, does that mean that does that count as inheritance?
No. So object.keys just returns an array, and I'm just saving that array to a variable. I'm not instantiating a new thing. There's no inheritance happening here. That's just a thing that returns. So if my object is this, object.keys is going to return the array string name, string Chris. And I'm just saving that to a variable. Yeah, Noah.
Where did you define property name?
I'm writing a function that takes property name as an object, as an argument, right? Yeah. So its for each is then going to actually call that function for every property name that's in there. Yeah, Patrick.
Where did flicks come from? Object that uses flicks.
I meant flick. Thank you. Yeah, I meant flick. Right. Yep, thanks. I meant flick. Right, so for each is going to call that anonymous function once for every property that the flick happens to have, which right now is only 2 things, but it could be 20. It doesn't matter. We don't even need to know what they're called. So then what do I want to do for each one? I want to render a property for each one, right? So build a span. So render property. So here's the big question. What do I pass into render property? So what's the name? So I need to pass in a name and a value. So what's the name going to be? What's the name going to be? This is the easy one. Property name. So what's the value? Really close, and that's what everybody says. So let's just demonstrate, right? So flick dot property name would actually look for a property called property name, right? That's not the variable property name. That's the string property name if we use the dot syntax. You have to use brackets. Exactly. You get it? See? So property name is an argument that was passed into this function. So it's going to be each item in the array. So, okay, that'll get me my span. So I have a span. What do I do with it? Oh, sorry, yeah. Now I have my span. What do I do with it? That all happens up here in render property, right? I don't even have to worry about that. I don't even need to know how much work goes into building the span. Yeah, append it to the item, right? Item.append child item. Not item, span. And that'll just happen for each thing that's there. So the list item that we just created, which gets returned at the end here. So we haven't hooked this back up in handle submit yet. Let's just see if this works on its own. So let's make ourselves an object here. Let's say flick equals name Scott Pilgrim versus the world. Which Chris is in that? Evans. Year 2009 or 2010? 2010, I think. Director, Edgar Wright. Shooting location, Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Point is, doesn't matter how many properties are there, right? And let's call render item flick. What did I call it? Render item, it's right there. I didn't refresh the page, did I? Well, picky. Refresh. Here's our flick. Now let's call render item, pass in the flick. Look at this LI. Look at all those spans. Class name, value, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Class, Chris. Text content, Evans. I'm just building all the spans in the world. And I just built one method that makes that super easy no matter how many properties this thing ends up with. Right? Cool, because we extracted it out into a function like that. So now it just takes in an object, doesn't care how many properties it has, and it just keeps spitting out spans. I like it. So now handle submit can get simpler yet. Item here, we don't need to create the LI. We don't need to add the class. We don't need to append those children. All we need to do is call render item and pass in the flick. So we don't even need flick span and Chris span here, do we? Look how much simpler handle submit got. Handle submit's job is to deal with the event itself, deal with the form, and dispatch messages elsewhere to get the work done. See? So now our code is much simpler, and yes, it works exactly like it did before. This was just a refactoring. But if we had known all these tricks at the beginning, we just would have written it this way from the beginning. It wouldn't have taken very long. Does it still work? Enter a flick, Infinity War. Which Chris? So many Chris's. Yeah, still works. We still have our classes on there. Heck yeah, we do. You like it? I do. So what did we do here? Let's go ahead and commit this. Extract render item function.